I wanted to start off today by just thanking everybody for being here, particularly the students, but also, family, friends, some of the folks that actually, I've worked with in the past, Dr. Raymond, Dr. Barber, who I actually had both of you, I had class with both of you actually when I was at USI a number of years ago, but also Jim Brown, who was my golf coach, actually the reason why I came to USI back in 2000. So, for better and worse, right? So, then a lot of family friends, former boss, Brad Ellsworth, who's here as well, Mr. Bartell, who I actually had in high school, and I've obviously kept in touch with, through all these years, and then a lot of other folks that have, come out today as well. So I appreciate everybody for being here. For starters, I do want to at least address the title of this talk that I came up with, Sea of Opportunities. I just want to provide a reasoning for what that actually means. And it is in very short, it basically means there's a lot of opportunity out there for all of us. It's up to all of us to create our own future. But the one thing that you have to do in order to create your own future is know what it is that you want. Be able to see what it is that you want and do everything in your power to actually go out there and get that. I think that applies to your profession. It definitely applies to your personal life, as well as all other things in life. And I think that's, one thing you probably hear a lot from a lot of people, but I can at least tell you that's, the successes that I've had, at least in my life, that's the way I've at least tried to pursue my life. And that's the one big piece of advice that I'd like to give everybody here today. I actually just spent 45 minutes talking with Dr. Bennett about, I felt like it was actually everything under the sun. There wasn't a dead moment. And of course, as a political science major, and she obviously was a professor of political science, there was a lot to discuss. But I think there's a lot of things that she and I discussed that I also acknowledge would be a part of this talk. And one of the things that actually she brought up that I want to address, at least here on the front end, is as it pertains to that sea of opportunity, is that we've all got to make sure that while we're here at USI, learning learning what the academic side of what USI provides. USI also provides a lot of life lessons, also provides an avenue to the bigger world, and it's upon us to take advantage of that. All of us only get to go to college once, so we want to make sure that we take advantage of every second of that, but also don't be blinded by what is right in front of you, and make sure that you're always looking at the big picture. Because I think it not only will help you in the near term, but definitely will help you down the road. A little bit of my background, I will say, I graduated, or I guess attended USI from the fall of 2000 through, I graduated, actually walked in May of 2004, so I was here for 4 years. While I was here, played on the USI men's golf team. Some of the best friends that I've actually had in life, came from the USI men's golf team. We stay in touch, to this day. In fact, actually, a couple weeks ago, some of us still live in Evansville, some of us live in Indianapolis, a few of us live outside of Indiana. We actually did a big, I know JB, you were not able to make it, I think you were in Ireland that week, but we did a big reunion with the folks that, were in my class and some of the other folks, some that had graduated before me, but it was a great opportunity, a great time to kind of come together, talk about the old college days, talk about our current lives. Many of us have been in others' weddings, been at others' weddings, enjoyed together the birth of children. But it was a great opportunity. Most of the wives stayed home because it was mostly a golf week. But it was a great opportunity for those of us to come together, maybe 10 years after we graduated from USI, to share some of those experiences. And I'm here to tell you that there's no better experiences than you're going to get here at USI. I cherish every moment, that I had here. While I was, in addition to being on the USI men's golf team, I also served in the USI College Democrats here at USI, which when I first started, poli-sci major, so obviously I'm interested in politics. I think the cat's out of the bag on that one. But when I first started, USI actually had a USI College Republican chapter. The USI College Democrats chapter was started, I believe it was my sophomore year in spring of 2002. And while I was not a part of the group that started that, I was a part of the group that I would say helped grew that chapter. And that was, and I'll get to this a little more, down the road, but I think in talking to Dr. Bennett earlier, I think that was one of the times that I can point to where my time at USI, what USI provides we as students while we're here. College Democrats was the first time that I ever got to experience what it was that the first time that I actually got to enact what I'm preaching today, and that is, you can go to Harvard. Dr. Bennett was talking about the former president of Harvard in a panel that she had been talking, or that she had served on with him, and he was like, tell me something about USI, and she's like, oh, we're young but feisty. My comment was, that's, I think, one of the greatest things about USI, is that we might not be the Harvard with all the tradition. I think we were founded in 1985, I think was when we became independent from Indiana State, but you have the opportunity to do what it is that you want while you're on campus. You have the opportunity to build the things that it is that you want to do. While I was here, I helped build the USI College Democrats, had not existed. The other thing that I was also able to do when I was here that has definitely impacted my career in a lot of ways is I wanted to do an internship with U.S. Senator Evan Bayh's office. At that time, his office, he was probably I think in his first term as U.S. Senator, did not actually have an internship program. Particularly here in the state. I did not have the money to, go spend a semester or a summer in Washington, D.C., and wanted to do something that was here in the state for two reasons. One, to understand how an federal elected office operates, what goes into, that entire operation, whether it be the legislative side, dealing with, the U.S. Senator, dealing with constituents, what have you. I wanted that experience, and that was a situation. I know Pam Durter, who's in career services here, she and I sat down together, and we're just like, how do we make this happen? And I'll never forget, she was like, I'm not sure what we need to do, and I was like, why don't you just tell me how we need to figure it out with the university? I will figure out how to make it happen with the office. And that, to me, I think is, at least, that was probably one of the first times that, I really actively pursued something and didn't let anything get in the way. And to me, that was kind of the first step that helped make my career what it is today, is that you should never take no for an answer. You should never let any hurdle be in the way. I had a former boss back, I think 2004, that always said, you always must adapt and overcome. That's probably the best piece of advice that I've ever heard. The word no does not mean no. It just means find something else or ask me something else, which I think that's one of the big things that I want you to take away from at least this talk. So even beyond my time here at USI, I graduated in 2004, interned at the Indiana State Legislature back in 2004, which I, at least at that point, had been told, I know this past legislative session, the final day was pretty raucous. In fact, they have to come back in May for a single day to finish all the legislation they did not finish about a month ago. But that was the day that I think in the first time in the history of definitely Indiana, but I think any state, they actually attempted to do a remote television vote. There was a single legislator that fell ill. They needed his vote, and they sent the state police up to a hospital, I think was it South Bend, Indiana, maybe, or whatever, and actually filmed him saying, I vote yay. Not allowed by the Indiana Constitution, which I think everybody knew at the time, but it definitely created for some fireworks on the final day of what was then the legislative session. So needless to say, when I was an intern at the Indiana State House, it was a very interesting legislative session. But you probably, what I got out of that, you'll actually probably be shocked. What that internship actually taught me was that I did not want to work in government. It runs way too slow for me. What it taught me was that I wanted to work on political campaigns, that my inner being, what I wanted out of my career from a political sense was to actually be more out there on the campaign trail, which I do want to talk a little bit about with you guys today. So great experience. Of course, internships can teach you what you want to do, but I think in this case it may have taught me what I didn't want to do, which is also positive as you're moving forward. So then, moving on into my career, I think I've spent 3 years working on congressional campaigns, one of which for former Congressman Brad Ellsworth, which, by the way, I meant to tell you earlier that you get to critique me after this.
After all these people?
Yeah. So worked on 3 congressional campaigns, 2 here in Indiana, 1 in Alabama. Spent a year working on a governor's race in Virginia, a year working on a presidential campaign in Iowa, the Iowa caucuses, which I do want to talk a little bit at length about. Since we are in Indiana, we are in the Midwest, but I don't think that unless you've been to Iowa, you really get a sense of how political a caucus is. But also, if you're working on it, how much fun it is. No matter which candidate it is, that piece almost doesn't matter sometimes. But and then also 1 cycle, I worked at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in Washington D.C., which I'll get into here in a little bit as well. And then, beyond that, I will at least acknowledge, one of the downsides of working on a political campaign, if you can imagine this, is you work for about 9 months. You're working 14, 15 hours a day. You're knocking on doors, you're talking on the phone, asking people for money, you're doing a lot of things that are sometimes not within our comfort zone all the time. You're told no a lot, let's just say that. And you do it for about 9 months straight, and you really hope that on election day you win. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. And when you do win, it's the greatest feeling in the world. When you don't, there is nothing worse in the world. But quite possibly the worst piece of all of that is what happens after you win or you lose, and that is unemployment. Sometimes if you play your cards right, that could only last a day or 2. Sometimes that can last 6 months. Why I got out of political campaigns is the fact that I could not figure out how to make that work or be okay with that. I had to try to find another route to still get fulfillment, like I did from the political campaign trail, but doing it in a different way. And so in 2011, guess whether 8 months of unemployment. But it was honestly, at that time, it was less about not finding a job, but more about finding the right job, finding what it was that I wanted to do, not just for the next 9 months, but for the next 3, 5, 10 years. And so after the 2010 cycle, at that point, I had spent 6 years on the campaign trail. If you count all the volunteering through high school and college, that's well over a decade at that point. And decided that I wanted to go work with an advocacy organization in Washington, D.C. At that point, I got a job at ARP, which I'm sure everybody in this room has heard of. They spend more money on lobbying and advocacy than any organization in Washington, D.C., which was a great opportunity. It was a great transition for me. That was a time where I went from working in electoral politics and obviously working on issue politics. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they're also very different. Did that for about 3.5 years, and then for the past 3.5 years, I've actually worked at a public relations, public affairs communications firm called DCI Group in Washington, which is a little different than an advocacy group in that, we do more of our work on a contract basis as opposed to, just working on nonprofit work, basically working in-house in a nonprofit. Many of our clients are nonprofit, so it's actually in some ways very similar work to what I was doing at ARP, but there are some clients that are not. They're corporate clients. In fact, I think our firm has, we've at least been, we can count, I think it's 24 of the Fortune 50 as clients at one time or another. That provides a whole array of different work that you get to do on a daily basis, a lot of variety. Some mostly good, some not so good, but we all have that every now and then. Some days are not the greatest, but it's in a lot of ways a lot of fun, and in a lot of ways probably the most similar to the campaign trail that I can experience at this point. And I'll get into that a little more, but I do want to talk specifically at least about the campaign trail. I want to focus on, because I think one of the points that I wanted to talk about is going from, say, working just in Indiana to going more nationally, working regionally, nationally. How does that work? One thing about campaigns is there are a lot of people that do them, but not a lot of people that love doing them for the very reasons that I just mentioned. I would be one of them that loves them. But in some ways, we're nomads. 2004 was my first actually ever campaign to work on. Was based actually in Terre Haute, of all places. Being from Evansville is the 8th Congressional District, which spans from Evansville actually all the way up to Warren County, which is, I think, just west of Lafayette. Encompasses 17, and at that point, it's different now, but encompasses 17 and a half counties in this sliver, from West Central down to Southwest Indiana. I put everything that it was that I had into that job. And unfortunately, on election day, we got beat. And there was nothing I could have done about that. But what that opportunity did actually do for me is my life goal back when I was, I think, in 6th grade and took my first ever trip to Washington, D.C. was to someday live in Washington, D.C. Wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there, but that's details. Like, we didn't have to worry about that yet. But one of the things that job at least set me up for was I at least worked with a guy that had connections to a campaign in Virginia through actually 2 or 3 different angles now that I'm thinking about it, but essentially helped get me a job on the then Virginia Lieutenant Governor, now U.S. Senator Tim Kaine's gubernatorial race at that time. Tim Kaine was really nobody in Virginia at that time. He now ran for vice president last time, but at that point, nobody in Virginia really even knew who he was. He was the mayor of Richmond at one time, which I'm not going to explain this entirely correctly. It's different now, but back in those days, the mayor of Richmond was nothing more than just a city councilman elected by, I think it's 1/3 of the city of Richmond. They come together, there's 3 of them on this board, and one of them gets voted by the 2 others to be the mayor. Or I guess by 2 of the 3, so it would be you and one other person. So all you have to do is lobby one person and you're the mayor. He went from being mayor to, back in 2001, we all know who Katie Couric is. Katie Couric's sister, Emily Couric, was actually a very popular politician, state senator from Charlottesville, Virginia, which is where the University of Virginia is. Very popular in her district and regionally. She had every intent of running for lieutenant governor at that time, and unfortunately came down with breast cancer and did not make it. Tim Kaine was actually her hand-picked person to run in her place. Tim Kaine is one of the greatest men I've ever met, for a whole variety of reasons I don't need to get into here. But I went out there and worked on that campaign, knowing less about him, but knowing more that I wanted to be on another campaign. And the only 2 elections that year were in New Jersey and Virginia. And I hope if anybody's from Jersey, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I was not going to go to New Jersey. Being from Southern Indiana, I think I was more made for Virginia. New Jersey would have been a little step too far for me at that point. These days, it might be a little different, but I think back in those days, 2004, there were a lot of political operatives that worked all over the country. I think in that year, there were more, somebody told me this, so I don't know if it's fact, but there were more staff members working on campaigns in 2004 than in the history of politics up to that year. I think it's all changed since then. Obviously, there's a lot more staff level work on campaigns these days than probably even 2004. But needless to say, at least on the Democratic side, because Republicans basically swept everything in 2004, there were a lot of unemployed Democrats that were looking for work when it came to 2005. And I don't even know this to be fact, but they claimed all the resumes for these jobs in Virginia were about that high, and they hired about 75 people. How I was one of the 75, I know one person that helped me out, and I thanked them profusely, but I was at least one of the 75. And that was probably one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, was jumping in my car. If it didn't fit in my car, it didn't go. From Evansville, I moved out to USI. I could make multiple trips back and forth. When I'm moving to Virginia, there's only one trip that I'm making. And when it came to all my stuff, it did not fit in that Mitsubishi Galant. It was not making a trip. And we were talking about this actually at breakfast. It's good I didn't take that much, because my room that I lived in for that year was probably about as big as that hallway, and I only had about 75% of the room to sleep in. So there wasn't much room for my suitcase and stuff. But that was a great experience. Some of the best, I talk about the USI golf team. I mean, some of my best friends in life today also come from that campaign. That's where I met my current wife. It's where I met, I think it's 3 or 4 people that were in my wedding. we are still all as close of friends today as we were back in 2005. And that campaign, I think, in more ways than one, has helped my career, opened me up to a network that I never would have had access to had it not been for that campaign. And to this day, still at least benefit, from the relationships that I built on that campaign. Then came election day of that year. My first win, great. It was awesome. It was great. And then what happened the very next day? That guy started calling me. I got to sleep about 10 hours, and Brad was actually running for, Brad, of course, at that point was two-term, finishing his second term as Vanderbilt County Sheriff at the time, and running for Congress. And of course, being the political geek that I am, I was well aware that he was running for Congress, was very excited that he was running for Congress. I just wasn't sure that I wanted to come back and work on that same race because of the scars that I had from 2004. I just said that, in 2005, the best thing I did, was going to Virginia. The best thing I also did was coming back home and working for Brad. That campaign in 2006 was the first opportunity that I got to actually manage staff, to manage a budget. Actually, for the piece that I ran, I think we had a $200,000 budget over the course of the campaign. There were a lot of scars we got from that year, or as a result, I guess, of that year. But in the end, won 18 of 18 counties, and I think won by 20 points over at that point, 12-year incumbent Republican. There's no amount of joy that you can get, I think. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yes, there is. There are a few things, but at that point, there was no amount of joy that I could experience than, working on and winning, my congressional district, particularly the congressional district that I'd worked on so many previous years, and lost every single time. Then I wanted to just kind of touch on big picture plans. I mentioned the Iowa caucus earlier. How many of you have been to Iowa? Anybody? Oh, a lot. Okay, yeah. How many of you have been out there during the Iowa caucus or experienced the Iowa caucus? Okay.
Too cold.
It was told to me in 2005, and definitely lives up to its billing, it is the Super Bowl of politics. I don't care if you're on the right or the left. It doesn't matter. Both sides have caucuses. The rules are a little different on both sides. But the beauty of the Iowa caucus, it's the closest thing that we as Americans can experience to what, say, whether you like this or not, a European election. Most other countries besides the U.S., you have multiple parties running for office. In the U.S., we basically just have two. There's always a third and fourth third-party candidate that run, but they're never viable. The Iowa caucus that year, if I remember correctly, I think there were 9 Democrats running. I believe there were like 9 or 10 Republicans running as well in that same year. What that essentially means is, just to quickly touch on the rules of a caucus, if you care. There are, in Iowa, 99 counties. Within every one of those counties, obviously at the precinct level, every precinct, basically your neighborhood, has a caucus. There's a number of delegates across the state that are divided up amongst all of those precincts based on share of party vote. I think it was the previous Secretary of State's election. Doesn't really matter, but I just want to provide that. Needless to say, the urban areas matter where all the population is, but unlike any other election you will ever experience, the rural areas matter more because every one of those precincts gets at least one delegate. In some of those rural counties, even if they have 14 precincts, you may come out of there with over 50 delegates in that county. So you have to focus on all 99 counties. Johnson County, which is where Iowa City is, matters as much as Woodbury, which is Sioux City, or Potawatomi, which is Council Bluffs. So you have to essentially put together an organization across the state. How do you do that? Well, number one, voter contact field, which is what I came up in, matters more than anything in the Iowa caucus. You are literally for a year in the snow, because it snows a lot in Iowa. I've never experienced snow like that before. Snow, rain, whatever it might be, you're out knocking on doors, making phone calls, 5, 6, 10 hours a day, every single day, building the list. And what is that list? It's literally in every one of those precincts, if you expect 70 people to come out in that precinct and you need to get, say, 50% of the delegates, you actually have a number of supporters that you have to find. So you're literally going to the door and asking, who do you plan on supporting? This candidate, that candidate, and keeping track of all of that. If they're undecided, oh my, then I'm standing at the door a little longer and trying to tell you all about why my guy is better than the others and you should support them. And you should be aware that I'm probably going to come back to your door next week and call you the week following, because there's only up until 2007. So the caucus was actually, I think, on January 3rd that year of 2008. So up until 2007, there had never been in a Democratic Iowa caucus more than 110,000 caucus goers. That's a very small number of people. So the universe that you're actually going after is very minuscule. The campaign that I was working on, we were going off, well, there might be a little bump, maybe it'll be 120,000. There were 250,000 people that showed up that day. And needless to say, in my precinct, we blew out our vote goal, but we barely tied for third in doing that. So we were successful, but it was, Barack Obama, of course, won that year, went on to win the presidency. But I mean, the manner in which he did it was just amazing, and I don't think anybody ever saw it. But I will at least say, that was quite possibly, from a creative perspective, from a personal perspective, one of the greatest experiences that I've had. So simply because what I was doing mattered so much on the grand scale. My guy did not win, and in some ways that was not the worst thing, knowing what came out after that. But it was like, from an actual working perspective, like you could actually see what you were doing, right in front of you. Whereas, like, say, on a statewide or a congressional race, you're going to probably find 50,000 supporters and try to turn them out, but that's 50,000 of the 120,000 you need. So there's still a little, room for chance in there as well. In the Iowa caucus, you have to know who your voters are and make sure they show up, and recruit the precinct captains to be there so that when a candidate that's not viable, when they're basically broken up, they can then go persuade them in the middle of this caucus to come support your candidate. So not the staff person, but the volunteer that just worked 8 hours or whatever, and is doing this for fun, basically, at the end of the day, or because they truly believe in that candidate. It was a great experience. So I would, with that being said, I would just encourage anyone that's interested in politics and has not experienced an Iowa caucus, like, if you can take the opportunity to go volunteer, just go witness it. There's lots of people actually that just go out every 4 years and witness it. It's amazing to see. And I would say, like, a lot of people, I know, like, CNN, C-SPAN, Fox, MSNBC, like, they'll always show the big caucuses in Des Moines, at Roosevelt High School, actually, that's the one they always go to. But the smaller caucuses in some ways are actually more fun to see. Because in some cases, you're talking about 20 people. They're showing up there, and you know what? They all know everyone. They know their kids. They know their grandparents. Like, they know everybody in that room. And in some cases, they've all already made up their mind, and the caucus starts, I think, at 6 p.m. They may be out of there by 6:20. In some cases, they could be there till 7 or 8. But it's an experience to see. And then so the following year after that, I won't go too much more in detail beyond that year, but did get the opportunity to actually work at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. My region was the South, which at that year actually also included Indiana. But we targeted, I think it was 14 states across my region. So it was Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, down to like Texas and everything in the Southeast. The South is not usually very good for Democrats. That year, we picked up a lot. That was a different year. And at least added to the Democratic majority that was created in 2006. But that was at least a great opportunity for me, one, to experience DC committee politics, which, I mean, if you're not familiar with it, I mean, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in both the House and the Senate have caucuses that then run all of their campaign teams. This was at least the Democratic side on the House. Of course, solely focused on the House races across all of these states. But that was the first year, actually, that the Democratic Party invested in field on the congressional level. Across those 12 to 14 races, I think we would invest about $300,000, I think, per race. And it was basically my job to go out and find somebody who would actually be working for those candidates as the field director to manage that budget on the local level, hire the organizers to be doing the voter contact on a daily basis, hiring canvassers to go out and knock on doors. In addition to districts, there's nothing more political than a political committee. So it was also back home, back in the office, dealing with the politics there as well, which we don't need to get into. And so, I think so that's at least from a broad level, at least my political experience on the campaign trail. Some of the biggest takeaways that I have, would be great experiences. Wouldn't pass them up for anything. At this point, between politics, I think politically on campaigns, I've worked across 14 states through my entire career. I was counting this the other day. I think I've worked across all 50 states, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and 3 additional countries, which international stuff, that's a whole other being. So I would at least say, at least the career path that I chose has definitely given me the opportunity to see the country, given me the opportunity to see the world, a whole host of experiences that, you would never imagine, as an 17, 18-year-old thinking about, going to college. And with that being said, I would at least impress upon you, if you are interested in this, pursue it. Many of the folks that I worked with maybe only did one. I did 7, 8 of these, but just one campaign can provide you the experience, that I had on one of those as well. And maybe it's not your cup of tea, and that's great, but you know what? It's going to set you up in a lot of ways for your future, whatever that might be. So I think some of the advice that I would at least give you today is, chase what it is that you want. Don't let any hurdle get in the way. Make sure you go out and get it. Create your own future. I'm not saying that I've done that necessarily for me, but that's something I strive for every single day. Wake up every morning making sure that you're trying to build for what's going to come tomorrow. Before I get to the next piece, I do at least want to acknowledge that one of the things that I try to do on a regular basis is I love to read. I read 3, 4, 5 different newspapers, maybe not the whole thing, but every single day to some certain extent. But one of the things I love reading actually are newspaper articles, online articles about successful people. For whatever reason, I've been fascinated for the past few weeks by Howard Schultz, who is actually the former CEO of Starbucks. Actually started his career, I think Starbucks actually was his second career. He was actually a printer salesman for Xerox, I think back in the early 80s or something. And I can't remember if he'd been laid off or what, but he started Starbucks because he and his wife and family had taken a trip to Italy, and he'd experienced all the espresso bars throughout Italy, and was just like, you know what? The States, we need this. People want coffee. They want fancy coffee, and they want it on every street corner. And at that point, Starbucks had already started in Seattle, which Seattle is a big coffee drinking city. There's no doubt about that. But he came to the 2 guys that actually owned Starbucks with the idea of we need more than just coffee. We need varieties of coffee. We need espresso. We need all the different drinks that you can make with espresso. And he was told no. I think it was something like 10 or 15 times, and just kept coming back, kept coming back, kept coming back. He had this grand idea, this idea that he wanted to pursue, and no was not, he wasn't going to live with no. He was going to pursue it. And of course, I'm assuming we all probably drink Starbucks multiple times a day, if you're like me, right now. But to me, he's actually fascinating in that he took this one little shop in the market area of Seattle, and now we have Starbucks on 2 corners across from each other in a lot of towns. They're international, they're everywhere. he took the coffee experience, to a whole new level. But he also created that basically from scratch. One of the things I love about, looking at famous people is looking at the things that they do, the routines that they adopt to help try to set themselves up for success. One of the things Howard Schultz does is he wakes up every single day at 4:30 a.m. I'm not saying do that. That makes no sense. But he wakes up every single morning at 4:30 a.m. and he goes to work, I guess, 8 a.m., 9 a.m., whatever it might be. But what he never changes is his routine in the morning. He wakes up, he immediately writes an email to all Starbucks staff, an inspirational email to all Starbucks staff to help, get their day started. He does not look at email, social media, anything until he gets to the office. The rest of the morning is actually meant for exercise and for family time. And that's how he starts his morning. That's how he sets himself up for success every single day. And to me, I think, when it comes to looking at your career, when it comes to looking at your future, we've all got to constantly be reinventing ourselves. Again, I'm not saying wake up at 4:30 every morning, but one of the things that I try to adopt on a daily basis is there something that I can do that's a little bit different than what I was doing yesterday? Because if I want to be better today than I am tomorrow, I've got to change a little something. Because it's not just going to happen. I've got to go create it. And the other thing that I will also say is, if you look at very successful people, the other thing that they also do that I've followed a lot actually is you've got to read. You've got to be a constant reader. I think Warren Buffett, we all know who Warren Buffett is and the success that he's had in his life, reads 5 newspapers a day on top of the 500 pages of financial reports every single day. He claims that he reads a solid 6 hours every single day. Bill Gates, I think, claims he reads 50 books a year. That's nearly a book every single week. Oprah Winfrey credits reading with what basically motivated her to pursue the career that we all know is her career at this point. I mean, she's an entrepreneur. She's done a lot of things aside from even just her talk show. One of the most successful women ever. She credits reading to that. Mark Cuban went to IU, from Pennsylvania, but went to IU, claims he spends, I think it's 3 hours every single day reading information on the industries that he works in. We all think he's probably, a tech expert? He would claim he's not a tech expert. He would claim he's constantly learning about tech and figuring out ways to gain a competitive advantage over others. But it all comes back to reading. I'm sure many of you may want to go to law school. If you do, you're going to be doing a lot of reading. But I will also say those of you who don't want to go to law school, you're also going to be doing a lot of reading. So be okay with that. Enjoy it. It definitely opens up a lot of avenues. And then I guess, the one final thing that I do want to say is, and this is, when I was at USI, I came here wanting to actually major in finance. I want to be a banker. Actually, I want to be an international banker. I'm still not sure what that really is, but I didn't pursue it. So I was always interested in politics. While I was at USI, I became even more interested in politics to the point that I wanted to take nothing but political science classes, which is why I wound up majoring in poli-sci. I can remember, and still to this day, hear from many people, well, what does a poli-sci degree do for you? What does a liberal arts degree do for you? Honestly, I think it does more, in my opinion, it does more for you than any other degree that you can pursue. And here's why. Because poli-sci or liberal arts degree teaches you how to think creatively, teaches you how to debate, and encourages you to communicate that in a way that will be beneficial to you or whoever it is that you are representing. If you're the CEO of a company, you have to do that all day, every day. Dr. Bennett actually, in our conversation, I think every point that she was making, it was talking about having to communicate this to this person or that person or that. She's the CEO, basically, of this university. And she has to spend all day, every day, utilizing the liberal arts degree, PhD in political science, that she got. And I think if you look across a lot of CEOs, a lot of leaders, a lot of people that have excelled in their careers and in life in general, more will have pursued and graduated with a liberal arts degree than most people actually think. Howard Schultz is one of them, I will say. The current CEO of YouTube is one of them. If anyone's familiar with Alibaba, Jack Ma is one of them. He actually went to a Chinese school, but I believe actually majored in American government at that Chinese school. And also the founder of Paperless Post, I know, is one of them. And there's a whole slew. The former CEO of HBO, majored in liberal arts. But I think, in those of us who have graduated with a poli-sci degree, it's definitely, it sets you up. There's no doubt about that. It sets you up for your future and provides you with the skills that you need to excel in life. And that's, one thing that I wish more people had told me that when I was in college, actually. But I can at least tell you from my experience, firsthand, it definitely does that. And then, so just one final thing I do want to at least say as well is, I live in Washington, D.C. now. I've lived there permanently since 2011. I never did an internship in Washington, D.C. I did an internship at the Indiana State Legislature, which I know there's a number of USI students that do every year. It's a great experience. I would encourage anyone that's interested to look at doing internships in Washington, D.C. I would be interested in helping you pursue that. I would be interested in helping you pursue that and help with all the things that it is that you need to pursue that. Housing in D.C. is very expensive. There's ways to figure this stuff out. If you want to talk to somebody about, what opportunities are out there, use me as a resource. I'm available to answer any questions that you have. I'm available to help explore different opportunities that exist. I'm on I think it's 6 or 7 different job boards. The majority of the jobs that are out there are internships. There's lots of organizations out there looking for interns. So I would just, press upon you that, if this is something that's interesting to you, something that you want to pursue, something that you want to do, don't let any hurdle get in the way of that. Let's talk about it. Let's try to figure out a way, if it's something you really want to pursue, how to make that happen. So I do want to end with that, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Yeah?